Aries, let me ask you something, and don't answer out loud yet. When was the last time you thought about your job and felt quiet instead of angry? Not fed up, not desperate, just this calm knowing that something here doesn't fit anymore. That feeling isn't confusion, it's awareness. I've watched this moment show up for Aries again and again, right before a door opens, not because you pushed it, but because you finally stopped forcing yourself to stay small. Around January 26th, the energy doesn't rush you. It stands still and waits to see if you trust what you're sensing. If you feel that pause in your chest right now, stay with me. Leave a comment if this resonates, or just tell yourself the truth. Because what's forming next is quieter than you expect, and more aligned than anything you've chased before. And this is just the beginning. That quiet feeling doesn't arrive by accident. It shows up after you've pushed hard for a long time, after you've proven yourself, after you've stayed loyal even when your spirit felt tired. And that's why this moment matters, Aries. Because this isn't burnout, it's not impatience, it's not you giving up, it's you waking up. I want to talk to you the way a real friend would, not to hype you up, not to scare you, but to name what's actually happening beneath the surface. When your mind starts circling around work without panic, when the frustration softens into distance, that's usually the sign that your identity is shifting faster than your circumstances. You're no longer fighting the job. You're outgrowing the version of yourself that once needed it. And that's a very Aries thing. You don't leave because something is broken. You leave because something inside you is getting stronger. Here's what most people don't realize about this phase. The pause you're in right now isn't empty. It's full of information. You're noticing what drains you. You're noticing what feels outdated. You're noticing how much energy you spend explaining yourself instead of being recognized. That awareness is already doing work on your behalf. And I know part of you wants movement. You're a fire sign. Stillness can feel uncomfortable. But this kind of stillness isn't stagnation, it's alignment adjusting its grip. Have you noticed how you're speaking differently lately? Not louder, clearer, less defensive, more selective with your words. That's not random. That's you unconsciously preparing for a room you haven't entered yet. People often think opportunities arrive with noise, big announcements, obvious signals, but the ones that actually change your life usually begin quietly. A conversation that lingers in your mind longer than expected. A question someone asks you that hits closer than it should. A moment where you realize you no longer want to prove your worth. You want to place it where it belongs. This is where Aries sometimes rushes. And I'm saying this gently, as someone who's watched it happen. You don't need to run ahead of this moment. You don't need to announce your next move. You don't need to convince anyone you're ready. What matters now is discernment. Knowing what deserves your fire and what no longer does. Ask yourself something honestly. If you didn't need approval, where would your energy naturally want to go? That answer won't come from pressure, it comes from listening. And the more you honor that inner shift, the more the outer world begins to rearrange around you. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped negotiating with what no longer fits. If you feel calmer than you used to, that's not you losing ambition. That's ambition maturing. And when Aries energy matures, it doesn't chase doors. It recognizes when one is already loosening its hinge. You don't have to force clarity tonight. Just notice what feels lighter when you imagine letting go. That awareness alone is already moving you closer than effort ever could. There's something quietly misunderstood about dates like January 26th. People expect fireworks, a sudden email, a clean yes or no. But that's not how real turning points work, Aries. They don't arrive loudly. They arrive when you stand differently inside your own life. What shifts first isn't your situation, it's your posture. I've noticed this with Aries more than any other sign. The moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you stop filling the silence with effort, something in the room changes. Not outside of you. Around you. January 26 carries that kind of energy. Not an answer. A recalibration. You begin to speak less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally trust that your presence already speaks for you. You begin to watch more closely. The tone of conversations. Who leans in when you talk? Who only listens when you perform? That awareness sharpens something ancient in you. A kind of instinct Aries was born with, but learned to mute in order to survive. And here's the part I want to say carefully, as a friend. When you stop asking a place to see you, you give yourself permission to see it clearly. You notice where your energy is being consumed instead of multiplied. You notice how often your strength has been mistaken for availability. You notice how much of your fire has been used to keep things running rather than building something that actually reflects you. This isn't bitterness, it's clarity. And clarity has a strange effect. It makes you heavier in the room, more grounded, less movable. Have you felt that lately, that quiet sense of being harder to sway even when nothing external has changed? That's the pivot. Opportunities don't form because you chase them. They form when your internal signal changes, when your yes becomes rarer, when your no becomes clean. People begin to feel that difference before they can explain it. They start speaking to you with more respect, asking instead of assuming, listening instead of directing. Not because you demanded it, because you stopped shrinking to keep things comfortable. This is where Aries often underestimates their own power. You think movement means action. But sometimes movement is restraint. Sometimes the most decisive thing you can do is refuse to rush into a version of success that costs you your center. Let me ask you something, gently. If you trusted that you don't need to prove your value anymore, what conversations would you stop chasing? Sit with that question. Not to answer it tonight, just to let it loosen something. January 26 doesn't bring a miracle. It brings a mirror. And what you see there isn't someone waiting to be chosen. It's someone already choosing themselves. That's why the door doesn't need to be forced. It's already responding to the way you're standing now. And once that shift settles into your body, the world has no choice but to rearrange itself around you. Quietly, naturally, in its own time. There's a reason this part of the journey feels almost invisible. Not empty. Invisible. Because what's forming around you right now doesn't announce itself as an opportunity. It moves like a quiet current under the surface of your days. When people hear the word offer, they imagine certainty. A subject line, a number, a decision placed neatly in front of them. But that's not how real alignment begins, Aries. It begins earlier, much earlier. I want you to hear this the way a friend would say it to you over a late cup of coffee. The offer isn't a thing yet. It's a pattern. It shows up in moments that don't look important at first, a conversation that lingers in your body after it ends, someone asking your opinion and actually waiting for the answer, a name that keeps circling back into your life from different directions. Those moments aren't random. They're structural. They're the framework being quietly assembled before anything solid can rest on it. This is where Aries sometimes gets restless, because you're wired for movement, for clarity, for action that makes sense of the fire inside you. But this phase asks for a different strength, the strength to notice without grabbing, to listen without deciding, to let the shape of what's coming reveal itself before you step into it. Have you noticed how certain conversations feel heavier lately, not in a bad way, but in a way that makes you pause before responding? That pause matters. It's your intuition calibrating, testing resonance instead of reaction. An offer in formation often arrives disguised as curiosity. Someone wondering out loud if you'd be open to something different, someone mentioning a direction you hadn't said you wanted yet, but somehow feels familiar. And the reason it feels familiar is because you've already grown into the person who fits that space. You just haven't named it. This is not the moment to force conclusions. It's the moment to let information collect naturally, to watch who keeps showing up, to notice which ideas energize you without effort. Here's a truth most people learn too late. The opportunities that last are built through recognition, not persuasion. When someone truly sees your value, they don't need convincing. They need confirmation. And that's what this phase is quietly giving you, confirmation, for them and for you. Let me ask you something gently. If you trusted that what's meant for you is already finding its way closer, how differently would you listen right now? You don't need to label anything yet. You don't need to prepare a response. You don't need to decide who you're becoming. Just stay receptive. Not open in a vulnerable way, open in a grounded way. The kind of openness that knows when to wait. And when the timing shifts, you'll feel it in your body before your mind catches up. Because when an offer finally takes form, it won't feel like luck. It will feel like recognition, catching up to who you already are. And that quiet confidence, the one growing without noise, is exactly what allows the right door to find you instead of the other way around. There's a particular kind of impatience that shows up only after you've matured a little. It doesn't feel frantic, it feels justified. That's the one I want to talk to you about, Aries. I've watched so many strong, capable Aries reach this exact moment where the ground finally starts to shift beneath them, and instead of letting it settle, they leap. Not because they're reckless, but because they're tired of waiting, tired of almosts, tired of knowing they're meant for more and wanting proof that the world agrees. I say this gently as someone who cares about you. Speed is not always strength. Sometimes it's fear dressed up as confidence. When the inner shift happens, the instinct is to act fast, to apply everywhere, to announce you're done, to burn the bridge before the new one is fully visible. But that kind of motion can scatter the very energy that's starting to concentrate around you. Here's the quiet truth. The opportunities forming right now aren't responding to urgency. They're responding to clarity. When you move too quickly, you send the signal that you're still trying to escape something instead of choosing something, and people can feel that difference. There's a moment in this phase where restraint becomes an act of self-respect, not holding back out of fear, but holding steady out of discernment. You don't need to prove you're available. You don't need to convince anyone you're ready. Your presence already carries weight when you stop placing it everywhere. Have you noticed how saying no feels different now? Less guilt, more relief. That's not arrogance. That's alignment teaching you where your energy belongs. I've seen Aries sabotage themselves by accepting offers that felt flattering but hollow, by jumping at momentum instead of meaning, by choosing movement over resonance, and later they wonder why the fire fades so quickly. This is the moment to recalibrate your sense of worth. Not by affirmations, by behavior, where you choose to invest your time, what conversations you disengage from without explanation, which invitations you let pass without chasing the feeling of being wanted. That's how value resets itself in the real world. Ask yourself something honestly. If you weren't afraid of missing out, what would you decline without hesitation? That answer tells you more than any offer ever could. There's power in waiting when you know you're not waiting to be chosen, you're waiting to choose wisely. And that waiting doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels grounded, almost calm. That calm is a signal. It means you're no longer negotiating with what diminishes you. The right opportunities don't require you to rush toward them. They meet you where you stand when you're finally standing in your full height. Let the impulse pass. Let the noise quiet down. What's meant to recognize you won't need you to chase it. It will approach, because your energy has become unmistakable. And when that happens, you'll know the difference between moving fast and moving true. There comes a moment when movement no longer looks like force. It looks like precision. That's the kind of movement Aries grows into with time. Not the rush that burns hot and fast, but the quiet step that lands exactly where it needs to. You've probably felt it already. That subtle shift from wanting something to knowing what you will no longer accept. For Aries, doors don't open because you wait patiently. They open when your truth becomes clear enough to stand on its own. Not shouted, not defended, simply stated. There's a power in saying what you want without asking for permission, and an even deeper power in saying it without needing reassurance. I've seen this happen in small, almost forgettable moments. A sentence spoken calmly in a meeting, a boundary named without apology, a pause before answering a question that once would have triggered you. Those moments don't look dramatic, but they change how people read you. Suddenly, your words carry weight, not because you pushed them forward, but because they came from alignment instead of urgency. This is how Aries energy matures. The fire doesn't disappear. It concentrates. When you speak from that place, you don't sound like someone asking to be chosen. You sound like someone who knows where they belong, and that changes the room. People remember clarity. They remember confidence that doesn't need to prove itself. They remember the person who didn't over-explain, who didn't chase approval, who trusted their own direction enough to let the moment breathe. Have you noticed how your voice feels different lately when you speak about your work? Less tension, more certainty. Even when the outcome is still undefined, that's not accidental. That's the signal others respond to before any opportunity takes shape. For Aries, the right door often opens sideways, through conversation, not application, through recognition, not performance. Someone remembers something you said weeks ago. Someone connects your name to a need that just surfaced. Someone begins to see you not as capable, but as necessary. And the reason that happens is because you stopped asking the world who you should be. You showed up as yourself, fully, cleanly. Let me ask you something. Quietly. If you trusted that your clarity is enough, what would you say differently the next time your path comes up in conversation? You don't need to pitch your future. You don't need to justify your direction. You just need to stand in it. That's when the door responds. Not all at once, not with fireworks, but with a shift in how you're perceived. And once that shift happens, you don't have to knock anymore. You're already being noticed. This kind of progress doesn't exhaust you. It steadies you. It feels like coming back into your own rhythm. And that rhythm, the one that belongs only to you, is what guides the next step without forcing it. Trust that. Because Aries doesn't open doors by waiting. You open them by being unmistakably yourself at exactly the right moment. And that moment, when it arrives, will feel less like a leap and more like recognition. There's a softer truth underneath all of this that doesn't get talked about enough, especially with Aries. You were taught to measure success by output, by speed, by how much you can carry without stopping. So when the idea of being paid comes up, the mind goes straight to numbers, titles, proof. But alignment doesn't start there. It starts somewhere quieter, somewhere more intimate. Aligned is the moment you no longer wake up bracing yourself to perform. It's the relief you feel when you realize you don't have to translate who you are just to be accepted in a room. And I need you to hear this as a friend, not as advice. The exhaustion you felt before was not because you worked too hard. It was because you worked out of character. You showed strength where honesty was needed. You showed patience where truth wanted to speak. You wore confidence like armor instead of letting it breathe. That takes a toll, not on your ambition, on your spirit. When alignment begins to settle in, something shifts in how effort feels. You're still capable, still driven, but the push becomes cleaner, less forced, less loud. Have you noticed how some days now feel strangely easier, even when nothing concrete has changed? That's alignment repairing the leak, the one that drained your energy without you realizing it. Being paid in this season is not about being rewarded for suffering. It's about no longer spending yourself in places that cannot hold you. Paid, in its truest sense, is reciprocity. It's being met. It's having your contribution land instead of disappear. And that only happens when you stop playing roles you've outgrown. There's a version of you that learned to be impressive, to be reliable, to be strong enough to never need anything. That version got you here. But it's not the one meant to carry you forward. Alignment asks a different question. What if you didn't have to earn belonging anymore? What if the next chapter of your work, life, was built around resonance instead of endurance? This is where healing enters the picture, not as rest from effort, but as release from pretending. When you show up as yourself, fully and without negotiation, your energy changes the exchange. People feel it, they respond to it, they compensate it differently. Not because they owe you, but because alignment naturally commands respect. Let me ask you something quietly. If no one was watching, how would you want your work to feel in your body? Not the outcome, the feeling. That answer matters more than you think. Because when your inner world lines up with your outer actions, money stops being something you chase and becomes something that flows through the right channels. This is not about abundance fantasies. It's about integrity. And integrity, when lived consistently, creates stability. creates trust, creates sustainability. You're not here to prove your worth anymore. You've already done that. You're here to stop betraying yourself for environments that cannot meet you where you are now. That decision alone, the quiet one you make inside, is what begins to change how you are valued. And when compensation follows alignment, it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like coming home to yourself and finally being met there. That is the kind of healing that lasts. There's a way alignment reveals itself that doesn't need affirmation or reassurance. It shows up in your body first. Quietly. Almost privately. You don't announce it. You live it. I've noticed this with Aries when the inner work starts to settle for real. The noise fades. Not because the world got easier, but because you stopped wrestling with it. You wake up and the weight you used to carry into the day isn't there anymore. The job may be the same. The responsibilities may not have changed, but something inside you has softened its grip. That's one of the clearest signs you're moving in the right direction. When your nervous system stops bracing for impact. You don't complain as much anymore. Not because you're suppressing yourself, but because you've realized how little complaining ever moved the needle. Instead, you observe, you register, you decide quietly what deserves your energy and what doesn't. That shift alone changes how your days feel. Sleep starts to come easier. Not perfect, but deeper. Your mind isn't replaying conversations late into the night. You're not rehearsing arguments or proving your point in your head. You let things end where they end. That's not indifference. That's peace re-entering the system. And one morning, maybe without realizing it, you stop checking yourself against others. You still notice them. You still respect their skills. But the comparison loses its charge. You no longer measure your progress against their timeline. Because something in you finally understands that your path doesn't need to resemble anyone else's to be valid. That's not confidence you forced. That's confidence that arrived when pressure left. Here's what makes this phase different from positive thinking. You're not telling yourself things are fine. You're responding differently because they are. Your reactions slow down. Your boundaries hold without explanation. Your sense of self stops, fluctuating based on external feedback. Have you noticed how you're less reactive lately even when something doesn't go your way? That's alignment grounding itself into your behavior. This is how you know you're not just talking about growth, you're living it. And it matters because real alignment doesn't need motivation. It creates momentum naturally. When you're centered, you don't chase validation. You don't rush decisions to soothe anxiety. You don't abandon yourself to fit into spaces that feel off. That steadiness changes how people interact with you. They approach you differently. They listen differently. They sense that you're not easily pulled off course, not because you've hardened, because you've clarified. Let me ask you something gently. If you trusted this calm as a sign of direction, what would you stop questioning right now? You don't need to answer it out loud. Just notice what comes up. Because these signs, the quieter mind, the deeper rest, the absence of comparison, are not side effects. They're confirmation, not that everything is finished, but that you're finally walking with yourself instead of against yourself. And that kind of alignment doesn't disappear overnight. It builds, it stabilizes, it prepares you for what comes next without rushing you toward it. You're not drifting, you're calibrating. And when the next opportunity recognizes you, it won't feel like a rescue. It will feel like a continuation. That's how you'll know you didn't just find a new direction. You found your footing. There's something I want to leave you with tonight, Aries. Not as a conclusion, more like a hand resting lightly on your shoulder. You've done something important without making a big deal out of it. You listened. You slowed down enough to notice yourself changing. That matters more than any title ever could. So many people reach for the next chapter while still dragging the last one behind them. They rush because they are afraid that if they pause, they'll lose momentum. But you didn't do that. You stayed present long enough to feel your footing return, and that's why this moment feels different. You're not arriving here exhausted. You're arriving steady, clear-eyed, more honest with yourself than you've been in a long time. If you're an Aries and you recognize this feeling, I want you to hear this gently. You are not behind. You never were. You are gathering something that can't be rushed: discernment, self-trust, the ability to walk away from what looks good but feels wrong. Those things don't show up on resumes, but they shape every opportunity that comes after. I know part of you wonders if you waited too long, if you should have moved sooner, if you missed a window that won't come back. But that thought belongs to an older version of you, the one who believed timing was about speed. What you're learning now is that timing is about readiness, about alignment between who you are and what you're stepping into. That's not luck. That's integrity. And integrity has a quiet gravity to it. You don't need to announce where you're headed next. You don't need to justify the pace you're moving at. The people and places meant to meet you will recognize the steadiness in your presence. They already are. If you feel a sense of calm where anxiety used to live, trust that. If your instincts feel sharper but less reactive, honor that. If your fire feels warmer instead of explosive, protect that. Those are not signs of hesitation. They're signs of mastery. Let me ask you one last question, softly. What if this phase isn't about getting somewhere new, but about finally arriving as yourself? Sit with that, not to answer it, just to let it breathe, because the door you're approaching doesn't open to urgency. It opens to clarity, to self-respect, to the version of you that no longer needs to be louder to be seen. You're not walking toward something that needs convincing, you're walking toward recognition. And when the moment comes to step through, it won't feel like a gamble. It will feel like continuity, like your life finally making sense in the way it always should have. We'll talk soon about what needs to be released so that step feels lighter, not as a demand, as a gentle invitation. For now, trust the pace you're moving at. Trust the quiet confidence settling in your body. Trust that the door responding to you is doing so because you are finally standing in your own truth. And that Aries is exactly on time. There's something subtle I've noticed as this journey comes to rest for a moment, Aries. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. When a door is truly forming, life doesn't get chaotic. It gets quiet. That quiet isn't emptiness. It's precision. So let me ask you this gently, before we part for now. What part of your life feels calmer than it did just a few weeks ago, without you trying to fix anything? That's not coincidence. That's alignment settling into place. Here's a small observation you might not have named yet. When you're moving in the right direction, your urgency fades before your circumstances change. The fire inside you stops racing ahead and starts warming the ground beneath your feet. Tonight, I want to invite you into a moment of silence, not to think, not to plan, just to notice your body. Where does it feel less tense than it used to? Where does your breath move more freely? That's your inner signal. If you want a simple inner practice to carry with you, try this. Before you sleep, ask yourself one quiet question and don't answer it out loud. What would I stop forcing if I trusted my timing? Let that question sit with you. No pressure, no rush. I'll say this as someone who's been walking alongside you through this message. You don't need to chase what's coming next. You're already in conversation with it. If this message touched something real in you, leave a comment, not to prove anything, just to mark the moment. And if you feel called, subscribe so we can continue this journey together. Trust yourself, Aries, not because everything is clear, but because you've learned how to stand steady inside uncertainty. The journey isn't ending here, it's simply changing its rhythm. There's more to unfold, more to release, more light waiting behind the next quiet decision. We'll talk again soon. When the next message arrives, you'll recognize it. Not by the noise it makes, but by the calm it brings. Until then, stay grounded, stay honest, and stay open to the door that's already responding to you.